Call the meeting to order. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory in the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. The panel today, to my far left is Brent McIntyre, to my left is Linda McFadden. I'm Robert Buss, the chair. Our assessor is Jamie Fougere. Secretary is Huda Aziz. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. Statements that applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included in the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony, followed by questions that the other applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony, followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be a part of the public record.
Would you like to swear in on the Bible or?
I'll swear.
Okay. Please state your full name.
Jamie Fougere.
And do you swear the evidence you're about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Please state your full name.
Trevor Gladstone.
And do you swear the evidence you're about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, are there some matters that you're in agreement with?
Yeah, there are. There are a couple that we agreed to a little while back, and then a couple more that we agreed to last night. So if you wanted to, we can go through the ones that we're in agreement with.
Okay, we could do that. We'll start with that.
So the first one actually have a recommendation.
Is that 227 Henderson?
Right, 227 Henderson. There's 5 there. Thank you.
Okay, if you'd like to read the roll number into for the record and give us a brief summary and the recommendation.
Sure. So the address is 227 Henderson Highway. The roll number is 14100126805. This is a cycle shop on Henderson. So we've revised our rental rates for both the basement and the main floor. You can see the main floor at $12.25 and the basement at $1.25. And those are the changes that I made for my recommendation. And so the total value is $1,225,000. Sorry, I don't have it rounded to
1 million?
$1,225,000.
Okay. And Mr. Smith, you're?
Yes, that's slightly different, but we're in agreement with the final market value.
Okay, right, thank you.
Just a quick question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
On the top of this form, you have 225 Henderson Highway?
Oh, I'm sorry. 227 Henderson Highway is what it should be. My
That's what I
apologies.
thought, that's fine.
Good eye.
Any other questions?
It was actually 2 buildings to start with, so there's probably 2,
Civic address, yeah.
The spikes and beyond.
that's right.
Okay, and
So going down the list, next property that we can maybe speak to is 166 Osborne Street.
okay, 166 Osborne.
Trevor, do you mind asking, you were planning on withdrawing that one or agreeing to the value? Is that correct?
We have the issue with non-recoverables, but that's, it is, I will agree to confirm the value on that one.
Sorry, I just wasn't sure for a moment there where we stood.
No, that's
Perhaps,
fine.
perhaps you could read the roll number
Sure.
for the record.
So the roll number is 1202-1199-100. The address is 166 Osborne Street.
And the value that is currently on the property.
Just gonna locate the value. Unfortunately, I don't think I brought it with me, because I wasn't expecting to.
3,623,000.
Does that sound right?
I didn't bring it with me either, but it does sound roughly
Okay.
correct.
That's what's on the brief.
Okay,
That's what I have on my computer as well.
very good. We will confirm it.
Okay.
We'll take it under advisement.
Thank you.
Okay, that takes care of 166 Osborne.
So the next one that we have, that we're in agreement with, is 470 River Avenue. And the roll number there is 120-3211-9000. And for the recommendation, we have adjusted the second and third floor rents here. I've bolded it, here the $10 rates. And we've allowed a 10% vacancy. And so the resulting value is $914,000. And again, I think it's a case that Mr. Smith and I maybe disagree on the approach, but the final value, I believe we're in agreement on.
Is that in the brief, or is there a?
Sorry, I have a recommendation. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Morning hearings, right? Thank you very much. So, and just to remind you here, the second and third floor rents here you see bolded in the workup at $10 each premise, and then we've used 10% vacancy.
Okay. And Mr. Smith, are you in agreement?
We're in agreement with the final market value, yes.
Very good. Thank you.
So the last one that we have come to an agreement with is 117 Osborne Street. The roll number is 12032112000.
Okay.
And here, this is a property that has been vacant for over 2 years, so we've applied 25% vacancy allowance, and the resulting value is $354,000.
117 Osborne. What kind of what property is this? Do you know?
Yeah, so it's
where it is?
It's in the village. It's Desart.
Oh, okay.
So it went vacant July 1st, 2015, and it has post-reference been occupied, but sometime after the reference date. So,
It was vacant for over 2 years.
right,
The main floor space as well?
right. Yeah, so it's actually a one-story building.
Yeah, exactly. But Mr. Smith, are you in agreement with
We are in agreement with the final market value, yes.
354,000, was it?
Yes.
Yeah,
354?
354.
Thank you.
So that was, the adjustment was changed to 25%.
Correct, that's the change that we're recommending. And again, I have recommendation sheet here. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that was 117 Osborne.
And so for the remainder, which is 823 McLeod, 319 Portage, and 505 Sargent, I think we're going to discuss.
Okay, well, we'll begin with 823 McLeod.
So the roll number is 0400280960, 823 McLeod. Pictures of the property on page 8. So you can see the Dollar Tree there pretty clearly. It's a little bit more difficult to see though. To the left of it is a vacant unit, and that's been vacant for several years. And you can, another thing I want to note is with the aerial photography, you can see that there is potentially some room for expansion at the rear of the property. And you can see another aerial photograph on page 9. And so on page 2, you can see the subject lease. The Dollar Tree is paying $14.90. Started in 2014. And then on page 3, we have first some comparables in the area at various strip malls, ranging from $12 to $15 approximately. Next table here, we have the closest nearby discount stores, so Dollar Store, Dollar Tree, Dollarama, those type of properties. And they're ranging from $13.31 to $16.75 The subject pays $14.90. And then we have some sales as well for commercial properties. So on a price per square foot basis, I believe we're fair at $153.87. And then on page 4, you can see our income valuation here using $14.83 on the Dollar Tree space, and then $12.78 on the vacant space. We're then using a vacancy rate of 10%. And just want to have you turn to page 20. And there's a couple things I want to point out here. So you see where the vacant space is to the left of the Dollarama. And you see they're advertising $14 per square foot. We've used $12 and some change. And then it also says there's additional rent plus 5% management fee. So that's beyond the net rate. And if you turn to page 13, so this is the 2017 mailer, and we're looking at the net operating income. So we have $95,293 as the net operating income. If you turn back to page 12, you can see that there's a recovery of $6,358 for the management recovery, but they have a non-recoverable management fee there on page 13. That's $9,603. My understanding is that that could be additional management, perhaps asset management. So I would propose adding that back into the net operating income, because that's the business side of owning portfolios of properties and not the day-to-day with the building and running the building. It's more managing the assets, not the building. So if you add that back in, you get $104,896. The other large expense that I believe is skewing the NOI for this particular year is bad debts. We won't add that back in, but I can tell you that in other years, they don't, in the most recent years, 2016, 2015, they don't have that bad debt expense. And so I think that should be considered, that that's not a regular expense. And as such, the for previous years, the net operating income is $123,942 for 2016, and 122,645 for 2015. And I'll refer you back to our workup on page 4. So we're using a net operating income of 122,225. So again, 2016, 123,942. 2015, 122,645. And these are rates. These are net operating incomes that are after the vacancy, shortfall, etc. So that's my presentation.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith, do you have any questions of the assessor?
I do, yes. Let's flip to page 3 to start with. So the property, as with all commercial properties in the city that are not extremely specialized use, are valued on the income approach, the income model, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so the information on page 3 as far as the sale comparables is not to be relied on to determine the market value of the property?
No, I'm including it just as additional support.
Okay, so looking at those sales at the bottom of page number 3 then, I did review these a little bit in advance here. The first 3 properties, the 2 on McLeod Avenue and then 1420 Henderson. These are typical strip malls that are oriented parallel to the front street setback with parking on site in front of the property, correct? Good visibility from both directions.
So for your first question, I believe, and I don't recall which ones in particular, but I believe some of them are L-shaped.
Well, certainly 797 and 1420 are very bog standard, parallel entirely, not L-shaped. 844 McLeod has one portion of the building that is L-shaped, but has a the majority of the building is parallel to the front roadway. So I guess my question there is, these would be more typical strip mall, multi-tenant properties with good parking and visibility, correct? If you were driving
in terms of the orientation, I think I would say it's moderately more common that the storefront faces the street. I think given the size of the lot, which we haven't adjusted for, which may allow for future development, and the fact that it's beside a McDonald's, it's across the street, it's nearby these sales, virtually sequentially, that they have perhaps some roadside greater visibility on some of these other properties, but I wouldn't say that they would be significantly advantaged by it.
Okay.
But I would also point out that these sales, again, while I'm not relying on them directly, are a fair bit higher than our current assessment on this property.
Right. Here I thought we were going to get out of here early today. To the point regarding, actually let's stay on point and just finish with the other 2. So looking at comparable sale number 4, that would be River City Sports on Henderson, 1074 Henderson.
Correct.
Corner location, excellent visibility, new-ish property, good facade, etc. Excellent signage. Fair to say?
I don't think that the vintage of the properties differ greatly. I think that Henderson is arguably a better location than McLeod.
Right.
Again, the sale is 2016. It is over 2 levels, or sorry, it is 2017, I apologize. It is over 2 levels. So, and again, I'm not relying on it directly.
Right, and then the final one is a street front retail. It says retail store. It's 2 units, and then it's attached to a multi-unit street front mall, correct? At that
Correct.
location? Running parallel to the roadway.
Correct.
Okay, so when I look at page number 8, and I think this is an excellent shot of it. If we look at the photograph at the bottom of page 8, and you're driving along, and you driving along towards the east, so that direction past the photo, you glance over, your visibility of that very back unit is very low, is it not?
Correct, and I concede that.
And if you were coming in the other direction, it would not be visible at all, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then just looking at the site, so this is a property that has had exceptional difficulty in leasing that unit. Where would you see them adding additional space to this site? At the back?
Potentially.
Okay.
And I'm not asking to attribute any value to it, just
Okay.
that it's something that could happen at the site in the future. It has not happened yet.
All right, flipping to page number 13. So you made some adjustments. First of all, the 2015 and 16 year information is not in the brief, correct? So we don't have any.
That's correct.
Okay. You had made similar adjustments, I'm assuming, with regard to coming up with those NOIs that were stated?
Yes.
Okay. So in looking at, and I didn't write the figures down, but I believe you came up to numbers in around the 122, 3,000. So you have removed both bad debt.
No, sorry, that's incorrect.
Okay.
I was simply noting that the bad debt in this year is $17,000, and that expense does not appear in other years, and I'm suggesting that that's not a regular expense that this property necessarily has. I agree that there are ongoing vacancy issues which are adjusted at the front end of the expense report here. But I am conceding that the net operating income for my suggestion would be around $105,000.
Okay. Is the city, not yourself, but is the city aware that likely wouldn't be, is the city aware that they had, when that unit was occupied, they had a tenant skip out on them, and that is bad debt that's being referred to there, and it's carried forward?
I don't have the specifics of that information, but that is what I have assumed.
Okay, so the stated NOI that that they have in there at the end of their income statement here on page 13 is $95,293.
That's correct.
And the non-recoverables are hydro, gas, bad debts, repair and maintenance, small amount of administration, professional fees, and then a management fee. Okay. Those are all of my questions at this point.
Okay. Panel have some questions, Brent?
Yes, I do. Is Dollar Tree a national chain?
I believe so.
When did this tenant vacate?
It's been vacant for several years. I'm evidently in 2017, there was a tenant here that didn't make it and had some bad debts. I don't believe I have that information, however. But we are using a 10% vacancy allowance, and we think that that is fair given the review of the financials of the property.
That's all my questions.
Okay, thank you. Linda?
So you reviewed the financials for this property. This is not a model-driven value then, or
It is a model-driven property, it is a model-driven value. However, I looked at it in concert with the financial
So you
statements
didn't
of the
adjust it,
property.
you just felt it was supported by the financials that you had? Okay.
Correct.
Thank you. That's all.
On page 20, the information you have on that, trying to lease it, what date is this? When was this put out, do you know?
I don't recall, but if Mr. Smith is aware, I encourage him to comment on this. But typically, when I'm preparing our documents for the board, I try not to include any post-reference information. But in terms of the specific year, unfortunately, I did not bring that.
Okay.
I would suggest it's prior to 2018.
And on page 21, the space behind that unit that's sitting vacant, Dollar Tree uses that space, I guess?
I believe so.
So is that what you were referring to earlier? Maybe Dollar Tree would give up that space and then it would be a full unit? Is that
No.
what you were talking about?
My suggestion was that perhaps as the area increases in commercial potential, you can see on page 8. So parallel to McLeod, at the very back, there's potentially excess land that could be developed in the future,
Oh, I see.
pending zoning compliance and things like that, which I have not specifically reviewed. Just mentioning it as a characteristic of the property.
Okay. And the land to building ratio is 4.82. Is that good ratio, or high, low?
It seems high.
Seems high. So they could develop there, you're saying, and still have a reasonable ratio.
Potentially, yes. I think that from what I know, that they could arguably put at least a couple, 2 or 3 more CRUs on sort of the L leg of it.
Okay.
But I don't have any evidence with that regard.
And the income on page 12, there's a management recovery fee of $6,358.
Correct.
You were mentioning something about that.
So management is recovered as that amount. However, they also have an expense that is categorized as non-recoverable of $9,603, and that's on page 13.
Oh, yes, I see.
And given that if you add them together, they well exceed 5%, closer, I believe, to in the neighborhood of 12 or 15%. And so my deduction is that that's not a typical management charge, and one possibility that it could be is asset management, for which we would not accept as a deduction, because that goes into the running of a corporation that owns a global set of properties that potentially
But you
that
don't know
money is
that.
allocated to help run their portfolio and their investments.
But you don't know that for sure.
I don't
You're just
know that.
speculating that this
Right.
management.
I
but
do.
they
I
do
would
have the
say,
management
however,
fee in
though, that if we believe that a 5% management is a reasonable amount, I think we can therefore agree that 15% management would be not a typical
Okay.
management expense.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Could I have a follow-up?
Yes, go right ahead.
So just to be clear, you're not assigning any value to that additional land that you've
Correct.
identified at the
I
back?
am not.
However, your point is that potentially that supports the value you've given this property because there is some latent, if you would call it that.
Right,
value.
yeah,
Okay.
and I guess I'm just saying that it is beyond our assessment, which I believe is supported. I think it's an asset that the property has
Okay.
that we're not recognizing in this assessment.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Smith, if you'd like to take us through your list.
Absolutely. So what I'm going to do to start with actually is direct you to, well, we can look at page 5 of my brief, I guess, to start with, the site description. And this, we're getting into the weeds here with this discussion with regard to any potential additional land. What we're valuing today is the property as it sits today in the hearing that we're in as of the valuation date of April 1, 2018, not what the potential future development of that property may be. So we're valuing the property as it sits. Now, that being said, let's look at the site plan. If, and I'm not suggesting that this is under being entertained by the owners, because it's not, because they cannot rent the unit that they currently have. If you were to add additional space to this site, either at the back of the front or at the back of the site or at the front in some fashion, you couldn't do it at the front because you wouldn't have the circulation space, it would block the access to the site, etc. If you were to do it at the back of the site, you would run afoul of the parking regulations, and you would not have enough parking for the square footage that you would have on site. So it isn't the case that there's additional value to be gained from this site in the future. Beyond that, looking at the current vacancy that they have, there was no tenant there in 2017. That unit went vacant in February of 2014 and has remained vacant since that time. I don't have this in my brief, so I'm just going to direct you to the city's brief on page numbers 20 and 21. This is the Cushman and Wakefield Stevenson advertisement for the space, and I agree with the city that this is from the correct time frame. I think it says 2016 estimate for additional rent there, so it's in that early 2016 time frame would be my guess.
Excuse me, what page was that?
Sorry, it's on page number 20 and 21
Assessor's brief, I believe.
of the assessor's brief.
Oh,
Yes,
assessor's brief.
my apologies, I don't have this in my brief, so. I'm just
And you're saying this is in
referring
the
to
proper time frame?
theirs. No, it is the proper time frame. Yeah.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
you can see the advertisement there and the details on it, et cetera, what their asking rent was. Now, I work in the same office on the same floor as the Cushman and Wakefield brokerage. I can see these people from my desk, and I work work closely with them. So we're looking at Jonah Levine and Michelle Constant, as well as Ken Yee, that would be agents on this property. Now, these are excellent retail leasing and sales agents. They're extremely well known in the industry. They do an excellent job of their work. They're hired for new developments such as South Landing and Waverly West to draw national and international retailers into new developments at top rates. They know what they're doing. They've been attempting to lease this space since that February 2014 date at the rates that the owner is looking for. They've done extensive marketing. They're not drawing much interest, if any, in this space at over that time span. Not that there haven't been tours, etc., but ultimately people don't take it because of the location, the lack of visibility, etc. It's simply not a location that's going to drive the business that most retailers and tenants would be looking for. And again, that's a function of the street that it's on, the location at the back of the site, and the lack of visibility. If you drive past this property heading west on McLeod, you would never know that unit is there. So it's essentially it's almost a structural vacancy at this time. I don't doubt that at some point it will lease. My understanding from the agents is that the owners will have to accept a significantly lower rate than what they're asking for on the property, on the unit, in order to tenant it. So some background for you. Let's move forward to my page number 3. And you have the chart with some information on the property at the top of the page there. You can see in the 2018 assessment cycle, we were able to reach an agreement with the City of Winnipeg to reduce the value from $1,444,000 down to $1,278,000. Now, we've gone through the evaluation exercise for the current cycle, and we're looking at a market value of $1,340,000 for the subject property. Description of the property is at the bottom of page number 3. It's fairly standard. It used to have 3 to 4 tenancies. The Dollar Tree location obviously took up the majority of the building, and you're left with that very small unit at the rear of the site. Pardon me. Couple of photos of the interior on page number 4. If you look at the vacant unit, it's not built out, obviously it's shell space. And if you look at the Dollar Tree space, you're looking at tile flooring and drop acoustic ceilings, not your typical build out for many retailers in today's day and age. Moving on to the valuation itself, property location is shown on page number 6. So we're in that East Kildonan area on McLeod off of Gateway. So again, not a big thoroughfare. Obviously there is traffic down McLeod, but we're not looking at a Henderson or a St. Mary's or a Regent or Forge Avenue, anything of that nature. The traffic flow, which is what retailers rely on, would be considerably lower in this particular location. Looking at market value itself, so yes, looking at page number 9, the lease in place for the Dollar Tree is at $14.90 a square foot, and the other unit, as mentioned, has been vacant since February 2014. We run through a number of lease comparables at the bottom of page 9. I believe the city and ourselves are virtually in agreement on rental rates, so I'm not going to go through those in detail. However, we have projected a rental rate of $11.50 a square foot for the vacant unit, in addition to the $14.90 that they're achieving on the Dollar Tree space, which has a lease that runs through the valuation date. Altogether, this comes to a projected potential annual income of $144,640. Similar to the city's projected gross potential, somewhat lower. Looking at vacancy on page number 11, as noted, the property has a 15.1% vacancy rate. That's obviously the single vacant unit. It's been vacant since February 2014 and has been marketed very broadly since that time frame. It's almost a structural vacancy at this point. In the prior assessment cycle, there was a 23.3% vacancy rate as Dollar Tree took over some additional space and added to their unit. So the vacancy has shrunk marginally, but they're not taking, they do not need additional space and they won't be taking the vacant unit. The Johnson Report stats are at the top of the page. We are looking at 12% as a fair market vacancy rate for this property. Again, it's at 15%. That doesn't appear to be changing anytime soon, and it's certainly been that way for the last 5 years, I guess, prior to the valuation date, 4 years. Expense allowance. I will just ask this question up front. I've presented my information on this certainly a number of times to 2 of the panel members, perhaps not you, Mr. Chair. Would you like to go through this in detail, or what is your preference? It's a significant issue before the board this cycle, and I can run through it efficiently if you wish.
And I've heard a number of different, not from you particularly. Maybe you could, if you could give me a little synopsis of it, how would that be if, you know, my other 2 panel members have heard it? And if you could give me a little.
So I'll be as concise as I can here. We have some rebuttal information that I will also be concise on. But the expense allowance issue, if you look at my page number 11 and 12, the city is using a 2% allowance in their valuation. In prior cycles, going back into the 2000s and perhaps before, the city has utilized 2 expense allowance amounts in addition to the shortfall amount. That was a 2% allowance, which was termed other. That was always stated to be a structural allowance before this border revision. And then there was what was termed a 5% management expense allowance, which was allowed by the city of Winnipeg. Now, that management terminology was a misnomer, essentially. It was never intended to be reflective of the property management expense and a recovery of that, as the standard in our market, in the majority of markets throughout North America, is that property management expenses are recoverable under the lease terms in the vast majority of situations. This has not changed over time. Certainly within our marketplace, that has always been the standard, that property management is a recoverable expense from tenants under their typical lease terms, with minor exceptions such as some government leases or very unusual other cases. But the 99% of the time, your property management expenses are recoverable. So that has not changed. The city has, in their 2020 valuation model, the city has removed this 5% management, as they believe now that management is recoverable. Again, that has not evolved. So they have shrunk the expense allowance from 7% down to 2%. Again, the 2% itself, standing alone, was always stated to be the structural reserve, structural non-recoverable that an owner would incur in the normal operation of a building. So, very briefly, page 11, Appraisal Institute of Canada is the governing body for the property appraisal profession in Canada, and in their standard textbook, Appraisal of Real Estate, if you look in the middle of the page, we have some point form notes which come directly from that text in reference to the income approach to value in how net operating income is to be determined. Now, if you run through that, you can see that they state that from the effective gross income, you must deduct the operating expenses that are paid by the landlord in order to arrive at the net operating income. So this is directly from the Appraisal Institute of Canada. This is the correct methodology and needs to be followed in that way. If you look at that chart, and this is marginally off topic, but if you go up to the vacancy and collection loss, and this is again text directly out of the Appraisal Institute textbook, it states vacancy and collection loss, also known as vacancy and bad debt allowance. So in reference to what we were discussing earlier regarding the bad debt, yes, the bad debt does count as a deduction. Now, moving on. The reference to operating expenses that are paid by the landlord refers to non-recoverable operating expenses or expenses that cannot be recovered from tenants through the standard operating expense recoveries under their standard lease terms. These are non-recoverable operating expenses that are standard expenses incurred in the normal operation of a property and serve to reduce the overall net operating income to the owner. These standard non-recoverable expenses are items such as, but not limited to, professional fees. If you looked at the I&E from this particular property, you can see that those were included. There is also asset management, which is disputed by the city, and I understand that position. There is landlord work. Now, this is the work that a landlord would incur to bring the unit up to shell space, essentially, or other work on the building that would not be directly related to tenants. You have leasing commissions. Very clearly, tenants are not going to pay the landlord's leasing commissions where the landlord has engaged an agent, such as the ones here on the flyer, to lease the space to themselves. They're not going to pay the commission for that tenant, for that agent to put themselves in a unit. That is a cost incurred by the landlord. Tenant improvements.
I think
We can
most of these.
We can move on.
I guess my question would be the difference between asset management and property management fees. Are they different things?
They are different things, and it's been referred to by the city of Winnipeg with regard to the purpose of that asset management. I've done a number of hearings on this now. Asset management comes up frequently. It's an exceptionally rare circumstance where there are asset management fees that are charged on properties. It would have to be a pretty big organization for there to be asset management that is required. So it's a very minor component of the standard non-recoverables.
Okay.
I don't place a lot of weight on it. I'm not going to run through the rest of them. If you look at the bottom of page 12, as this issue has come up, we did a 3-year historical review of properties where we had full access to income and expense statements and all the detail required to determine the percentage of non-recoverables from effective gross income. We did a study from 2016 through 2018 involving between 45 and 53 properties, and we broke it into two categories. We did non-recoverables expenses exclusive of tenant improvements, and we did non-recoverable expenses inclusive of tenant improvements. You can see that exclusive of tenant improvements, the percentage ranged from 9.6 to 13.5% with a 3-year average of 11.5%. Inclusive, 10.6 to 14.2%, roughly a percent higher on the 3-year average at 12.7. So these, this is a very broad range of properties that we've looked at. It covers all categories: retail, office, industrial. And as you can see, the amounts typically add up to more than 5%. We're not seeking a change at this point in time to more than 5%, but we are seeking the reinstitution of the 5% non-recoverable allowance in addition to the 2% structural allowance. Okay. Moving on, we have the shortfall allowance, which we've deferred to the $6.50 of the city. Certainly that's fair for the subject property, and we can look at capitalization rate. Now, I've presented our cap rate study at the top of page number 13. These were all investment transactions. The properties, as you can see, vary considerably in terms of size and value. First property at Osborne and Stradbrook had 3 components. It had a street front retail component, it had a strip mall with parking component, and it had a small parking lot attached to it as well. Sold for $4,250,000 in 2018 at a 7.5% cap rate. This is a significantly better property than the subject property in terms of location and profile. Property on Gateway, considerably smaller, transacted in 2018 at 7.1% cap rate. Another larger property on Osborne in 2016, again standard retail, 7.4% cap. We have a larger property on McPhillip Street at $5,450,000, transacting at 9.1% cap. That was also a better located, better tenanted property than the subject. Looking at the city's ranges, etc., it would fall outside of the typical cap rates that that they would have in their study. If you look at this property, it's a relatively small retail property on a secondary roadway with a history of chronic vacancy. So if you're an investor looking at acquiring this property, you look at the previous 4 years where they've had no luck in leasing that back unit. You essentially don't have any expansion available to you for the site, so what you're buying is what's in place. So we believe that a 8.25% cap rate would be fair for the subject property, and this gives us our final market value of $1,340,000. And again, we were able to reach agreement in the last cycle at $1,278,000. So we have obviously increased our market value from that time frame to a reasonable market value. If you look at the addenda materials, it includes the I&E submitted. The very back of the brief includes decisions from the Board of Revision with regard to the 5% non-recoverable issue. The first one from 1169 Sherwin specifically mentions the re-inclusion of the 5% non-recoverable expense, and I have the information from that particular hearing just following that. Then we have 183 Kennedy Street, where it was the 5% non-recoverable was reinstituted, as well as 650 Main Street, 460 Higgins, and I've since received, since putting this brief out, I've since received quite a number myself of board decisions with the re-inclusion of the 5% non-recoverable. I obviously didn't have the chance to include them at that time frame. That's my presentation.
Thank you. Seek questions from the assessor?
Sure. Maybe we'll first ask you, do you know what the non-recoverable management expense stated on, sorry, I'm not sure what page this is, stated in the 2017 mailer? Do you know what that non-recoverable expense, the management fee of $9,603.38 is?
I don't have that specific information, but certainly a portion of it would be management fee for that would be non-recoverable from the vacant space of the building. But I
So
don't, it would
the
amount,
whole 9,603 is in that category, though.
What I'm stating with regard to the 9603 is that a portion of that would be representative of property management for that unit, but not the majority. I grant you that. I do not have the information as to what the remainder of that fee is, nor am I relying on it in my valuation.
Do you think that it could be asset management?
It's potentially an asset management fee, and again, as I referred, I'm not relying on it, nor am I specifically including it. And again, asset management is not, it doesn't form a significant portion of most non-recoverable expenses, and I'm not
So for
putting
this
any weight on
property,
that.
though,
We're focusing on one small little portion.
well, it just, I think it's significant to the valuation here. So we see on the page before, we do see a recovery of $6,358, and then we see a non-recoverable management non-recoverable management expense of 9,603. And so I'm asking for clarification that if that is asset management, I would make the case that it should be included in the net operating income. And for this particular year, it would give us an NOI of about $105,000.
Right.
And that, would you agree that that would be without the bad debts added back in? So would you agree that that's, sorry, taking the entirety of all the other non-recoverable expenses as a deduction?
So let's address that. As you noted, with regard to the bad debts in your review of the property, there had not been noted a bad debt amount in prior non-recoverables. It's showing in this particular year. Now, that's indicative that to me that they're unable at this time to recover it, and they're going to amortize that bad debt over a period of time on the building. That could very likely be the same thing for the management fees, where they were unable to recover the management fees from that tenant who skipped out on the unit, and they're now spreading them out over time. I don't know that it's an asset management fee. I don't know that it isn't an asset management fee. I don't have that information today.
Okay, and so you do agree that the prior years, 2016 and 2015, don't include bad debts?
I don't have that information before me today either, as it's not in either my brief.
Sorry, I thought you alluded to that, just a moment ago.
I was referring to what you had spoken about,
Okay.
that they hadn't included it. I do not have that detail.
Okay, so would you agree that 17,000, if you were to stabilize that over the past 3 years, would be approximately 5,700 or so? Would you agree that stabilizing bad debts might be a good idea?
Certainly, and in our so let's be clear here. What we're looking at is the financial accounting for the building. This is a 1-year snapshot. This is not the valuation of the building. This is how they've accounted for their building. So they have bad debts that they are showing in this 1-year snapshot of 17,251. It was that's the debt they have not been able to not been able to collect from the tenant that went dark. I don't have the information with regard to whether the actual amount is more than that, and this is the beginning of their amortization or not. So I take your point that yes, it can be spread out over time, and indeed that's why we look at more than a 1-year history generally when we're looking at stabilizing things. So to take these numbers and say that they should be smaller, I don't have that information. I would suspect that the debt is probably greater than $17,000 as you look at what the lease rate would be and what they'd achieve on it. I suspect it's probably larger than that.
Okay, maybe I'll leave that there. For your capitalization rates on page 13, your fourth cap rate comparable here on McPhillips. Are you familiar with the particulars of the sale?
We did review them prior to inclusion in the brief, yes. I didn't publish that information as we're not doing that for privacy reasons.
Are you aware that there is a land lease that is an expense to the property that's sold? To the tune of $151,000.
We did have the information with regard to income and expense, etc., for the property, and did review the material.
Would you, if that's the case, would you agree that for the sale year, if you took the net operating income, you'd get a cap rate with the sale price of approximately 6.9, using the actual
I'm
information?
sorry, run through that again for me?
So if you have looked at the particulars for the sale year of 2015, would you agree that if you were to take their reported income and expense and use their net operating income against the sale price, you get a capitalization rate of 6.9?
The information that we had on that particular property was such that the capitalization rate was 9.1%, and that was inclusive of all income that the property received.
So our department has spoken to the purchasers. Have you spoken to the purchasers?
Again, this was information that we collected in our standard course of business. Have I individually spoken to the owners? No, I have not.
Somebody who prepared the cap rate study, though?
Within our company, material was reviewed with regard to that sale, and they would have made inquiries as to the details, obviously. So if you have new information, I'm happy to review it. Obviously, we want to be correct. I'd rather know if there's a detail that we didn't know. But again, for privacy reasons, we're not publishing the addresses of
that's fair.
so,
right, okay.
nor the detail behind it.
Right. Okay. Well, maybe we can discuss further another time, but those are my questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Panel, Brent, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Page 13, the cap rate chart.
Mhm.
This really, now I appreciate the assessor somehow knows where this building on McPhillips is. I don't know where any of these things are. Number one, so the location is not narrowed down. The age of the building is not there. I don't know whether they're new, old, and the size of the land, which are important factors, I think, in putting any weight on this.
So, the reason and this is an interesting aspect. So there are obviously privacy regulations that are out there that one is meant to follow. Indeed, there's some within our appraisal profession as well. And up to the present point in time, I can confirm that the city of Winnipeg has always relied on the fact that they cannot publish any information with regard to sales details. That would be against privacy regulations, etc.
Well,
They're now changing that.
I can see that.
Mhm. So,
As far as identifying an address or a roll number.
So let's look at number one, Osborne Stradbrook as being our most recent sale. So this is at the corner of Stradbrook and Osborne Street. It is a multi-tenant, multi-parcel sale. There is a street front component of it right on the corner of Stradbrook and Osborne, that's fully tenanted. There is a strip mall component with parking on site at the corner of Stradbrook and Osborne. It's had a number of various restaurant tenancies in there with a couple of other CR units as well. And in order to meet their parking requirement, they also have a parking lot in behind, just off of a rear laneway. That is the package that was sold here. It was sold in 2018. It's a very well located asset, traded at 7.5% capitalization rate. That would be certainly superior to the subject property that we're looking at.
Okay, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Linda?
I don't have any additional questions.
So I think it was agreed that bad debt should be stabilized a little over a few years at $17,000.
Well,
Because if I was a buyer and I was going to purchase that building, I would want it all used in 1 year, but the seller would be saying, I think we should stabilize this a little bit.
there would certainly be discussions regarding that point. Now, I do not have the information as to what the full amount of bad debt is, whether it was just 17.5 or if it's additional to that, and this represents a portion of what the bad debt was. So I can't say that it's, whether that single snapshot represents all of it. But yes, the theory, you would spread it out over time.
You had suggested that 11%, $11 would be good for the vacant space.
I believe I used 1150, but yes.
You know, if the owners have ever, or if your people have suggested $11 to the owners and they've refused, or if that has ever come up in the conversation?
My discussions with the leasing agents is that that would be a realistic figure that they would be able to achieve on that. And again, they've been marketing it for some time and are certainly capable of filling it. So
They've been marketing it for some time, but at the higher rate, at the 14, or whatever it was, $14 plus.
yes, but that doesn't necessarily dissuade tenants from coming and having a look at it necessarily.
That's all my questions that I've asked. That will conclude that property? 8 include,
I do have, and I really don't want to take a lot of time on this, but it's important that I put it out there. I do have rebuttal information. I will take a maximum of 4 minutes, let's say.
go right ahead.
I'm not sure how many you're going to need, so there's a lot. It is, yes.
Excellent.
So
Thank you.
I know 2 of our panel members have already seen this, so I am going to be exceptionally brief. The point of this evidence is with regard to the non-recoverables. The non-recoverable issue, what we're stating here essentially is that the city is A, not following what their former methodology was. B, they are not they're not following the Appraisal Institute of Canada guidelines in arriving at their market value methodology, and they are also significantly different in their new methodology from other jurisdictions within Canada, including the province of Manitoba. So if you look just inside the front cover, we have an appeal from 2020 that I just appeared on in the city of Brandon. The second page there indicates the valuation model for that particular property, and you can see that the province of Manitoba has a 5%, what they're terming management allowance for that property, and a 2% other recovery as well. So the province of Manitoba itself has not changed their methodology with regard to non-recoverables. The following pages, and I'm not going to go through this, I'm just going to talk about it. The Saskatchewan jurisdiction, their Saskatchewan Assessment Management Agency also indicates that these non-recoverables need to be taken into account. They refer to a number of categories of expenses that should be included in this, and they have an example, I believe, in their materials. I'm not sure if that got included. An example of deductions that need to be made from the effective gross income to arrive at net operating income, representative of non-recoverable operating expenses. Then we have the MPAC, Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, which handles assessment in Ontario, the exact same situation. They indicate the proper methodology of deducting non-recoverable expenses, and then they also provide an example of calculations in which they have a percentage for non-recoverables. In their example, they're using 5%, but again, that is just an example. We're not relying upon that. In addition, we have decisions at the back of the brief. We have, I think, the 3 that we had discussed in my brief that I presented, and then I've included a number that I have just received myself with the re-inclusion of the 5% non-recoverable, those being 1873 Henderson, 353 Provencher, and 14 Island Shore Boulevard, and that is my rebuttal. Thank you.
Thank you kindly. Do you have questions of the rebuttal?
You would agree that these assessment jurisdictions are not the jurisdiction that we're the board here today?
I believe that to be the case, yes.
Would you agree that, I guess we're still on 823 McLeod, would you agree that my attempt to reconcile our net operating income included the deduction of and the acceptance to deduct all non-recoverable expenses except for this management amount that was in the $9,000 range?
I would agree that that was how you had approached it. I did not run through your calculations, nor am I necessarily in agreement that that $9,600 should not be included. And again, we're looking at a single year snapshot, not the broad history that we should be in stabilizing these expenses.
Right, which is why I wanted to point out 2015 and 2016.
This is questions about his rebuttal.
Right, right. So would you agree that their inclusion, which I've mentioned, meets that concept of trying to look at an extended period of time?
The inclusion at 15 and 16?
Correct.
I would agree, except that none of that information is present here before us today.
I can see that, yep, I have already. And so you'd also agree that the advertisement has included an advertisement for additional 5% management expense in this space?
I absolutely agree, and that's actually a key point. You can see that property management is a recoverable expense from the vast majority of tenancies.
And you recall in the mailer that they've recovered 6,300 and something for management already, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Okay, those are my questions.
Thank you. Panel? I have no questions.
I just have potentially a redirect question from earlier. Is that
Sure.
problematic?
No.
We saw evidence that there was a decision to reduce the assessment on this to $1,278,000 in 2018. Can you tell me whether or not the city has accepted that or taken it to the municipal board?
No, I believe, and maybe Mr. Smith can correct me, but I believe there was an agreement actually with the city.
That's correct. It was an agreement between the city and myself with regard to the value. So there was no appeal to be done.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Thank you. I have no questions either. That will conclude 823 McLeod. And I think we'll take a short break. 5-minute break for everybody.
Jeez,
Right.
Okay. I call the meeting back to order, and we will deal with 319 Portage Avenue.
So the property is 319 Portage Avenue. The roll number is 130523800. And you can see on, starting on page 8, at the top here is the overview of the property on Portage. It's across the street from the Bell MTS Center, and it's beside the new Alt Hotel. It's El Calcado. And you can see on page 9 as well, you can see it's the smaller building between the taller buildings. So the property is actually owner occupied. However, Mr. Smith and I agree on the overall rental rate anyways. I think what we'll find in disagreement is the management expense, which I think we've sort of gone through, as well as the overall capitalization rate. We've used, you can see on page 4, we've used the rate of 8.65. And since there's not any disagreement about our rate, maybe I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay. You have any questions of the assessor?
Just very briefly, on page number 6, the retail section of the cap rate chart that the city has there, there isn't really a street front retail or store category or anything of that nature, is it, in the chart there?
No, there is not.
So this would, I'm gathering, fall under what's termed the strip center at the bottom?
Correct.
At 8.65?
Correct.
But it's not truly a strip center?
No.
It originally built in 1906, really wouldn't fall within that standard category, would it?
It's the closest available category when you view it across the major commercial brokers.
Right.
And if you look at their rates, if we were trying to include our data for retail stores in this chart, and that's the next available category, it finds itself in the company of ranges of 6 to 6.5, 6 to 6.7, 6.5 to 7.5, 5.75 to 7. So it's also just sort of a matter of fitting it into the table here.
Yeah, fair enough. And those cap rate ranges that you're referring to from the major commercial brokerages are investment grade, that's what they're discussing in their presentation. This wouldn't typically meet their...
This would not meet the qualifications for that category particularly.
Okay. 8.65, it's a pretty exact figure. We're not looking at your typical quarter point integers in...
And the reason why it's not rounded to the nearest quarter point is because it's model driven through sales analysis and through income analysis. And so I think conversationally, an owner may agree that they're looking for a particular cap rate, but the data in aggregate says that 8.65 would be appropriate.
Those are all my questions, thanks.
Thank you. Linda?
I have no
Questions?
questions.
No questions.
Fred, questions? So there's two addresses on here, it's showing on one of the maps, 319 and 321.
Right, so
On your map on page 9.
So technically there are 2 units. As mentioned, the building is owner occupied. The one unit is the store itself, and then the second unit you can see is sort of the western unit if you're looking, there's a good shot of it at the on the cover of
Yes.
Mr. Smith's brief.
Yes.
So the unit that you can see has a separate entrance and a sort of just a blue blank sign. So that's actually technically a second unit. They have not kept up with the finishes here. There's older rug. It's basically used as storage for the business that's beside it.
Okay.
And it's just generally not kept up to the same standard. So we're actually proposing lower rate on that particular unit of $8.86. And you can see that on our page 4. And then the larger unit where the store is located, it's $11.41 that we're using.
Thank you, and there's a sale, $60,000 on May the 4th, 2005. I mean, it's kind of old, but Do you know anything about that?
I don't know much about that sale. I haven't reviewed it. I think that, you know, first of all, I don't have the details.
Okay.
But second, I would caution that the market for downtown Winnipeg is probably very different from 2004.
Okay, and as far as you know, they're not actively marketing that space on the left-hand side?
No, they're using it themselves purposefully for their business.
Okay, that's all my questions. Mr. Smith, if you'd like to take us through your...
Certainly. So 319 Portage Avenue, as mentioned, it is owner occupied, and it is the Old Calcutta is the retail entity in there. You can get all of your various t-shirts that you need of any variety in there. Page number 3 of my brief, there's some background information for you. In 2018, we were able to reach an agreement with the city to reduce the assessment from $727,000 to $640,000, as well as in 2016, where it was reduced by agreement to $530,000. The current assessment is $734,000, and our market value is $687,000. So we've our value is certainly reflective of any uptick in time between 2018 and 2020, and is in keeping with those prior agreements with the city as well. As mentioned, the interiors of the units have not been redone in a very considerable length of time. It is all owner occupied. The one side is cool, let's say. They don't provide a lot of heat over there on the storage side, which would be page number 6 you would be looking at. And you can see just the general condition of the property itself. So property was built in 1906. Street front retail consumes the entire site. There's further discussion of the actual building on page number 7, but obviously we would put this in below average condition on the marketplace. The finishes are generally from the 1980s in the property, and it has not been changed since that time. Site description shown on page number 8. As you can see, the entire site is taken up with property. I have not confirmed whether the property is on a heritage list or not. Certainly that potential is there with property from 1906, but I cannot state whether it is or not. Looking at the valuation itself, we're in agreement with the City of Winnipeg on a number of points, so we'll go through this aspect fairly expediently. We're in agreement on the overall rental rate for the property, on vacancy, as well as shortfall. Looking at the non-recoverables, obviously that is an issue which should be applied across all commercial properties. And when we come down to capitalization rate, the city is using a pretty exact figure of 8.65%. In hindsight, perhaps I could have been slightly higher than the 8.75% that I'm using, but the overall market value has to make sense as well. So looking at our past agreements on the property, as well as the market evidence, we're looking at a building from 1906 with very low, below average condition, certainly not attractive to either tenants or owner occupants in its current built-out state. You would draw a capitalization rate towards the higher end of what we see on the market. So we've used 8.75% in our valuation. and that gives us our market value of $687,000. And that is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions on this presentation?
Sure. Your capitalization rates on page 15, it's the same table as before, ranging from 7.1 up to 9.1. And you'll agree that the McPhillips Street comparable, if there is a large land lease expense associated with the property, that could impact the cap rate?
Again, I don't have that information in front of me today, so I'd be speculating as to what it is that's being referred to there. As I'd stated, we had information available on the property, and it was thoroughly reviewed in arriving at the cap rate, but I'm willing to look at any additional information at a later point. In reference to the sales, they're all significantly better than the subject property, and our capitalization rate would certainly be representative of the condition, location, age, etc. of a property such as this in downtown Winnipeg.
Okay, on your page 16, you have a comparable sale.
Oh, yes, sorry, I forgot about that.
So, if you were to look at the price per square foot of $102.88 and were to apply it to the subject property's square footage, would you agree that that would estimate a value at approximately $709,000?
That would, and again, and I state this on this page, it's provided as as background information. We're not relying on one particular sale to identify the market. Obviously, that's not methodologically sound. So we're not saying that this one sale should indicate value for the property. It was simply the only indicator out there that we were able to find with regard to street front retail of a similar nature. So typically you'd have more than these that would give you a range. I would suggest that this property was in better condition than the subject property.
And so you have a sale date of February 2014, and our reference date is April 1st, 2018.
It is indeed.
Would you typically look at potentially doing a time adjustment if you had the data available to you?
Well, what we do is present the material as of the date of sale. We don't time adjust them in the manner that the city does. We look at the information and would take that time gap into consideration, looking at other sales in the market. And yes, if we were doing direct comparison, which we're not, we would look at whether that would transact for more than that at the valuation date.
Okay. I think those are my, actually, sorry, just one more question. Are you aware if the owner has received any offers on the property?
I'm not aware.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Brent?
No questions.
No questions. No questions? I don't have any questions either, so we'll conclude 319 Portage. And we will move on to 505 Sargent Avenue.
505 Sargent Avenue, the roll number is 130515343300. We have photographs starting on page 8. So this property is a bit of a mixed use with retail and office. There's a pharmacy, a restaurant, as well as some office tenants on the second floor. And I just want to turn your attention to page 11 of our brief. So this is the income and expense questionnaire for the reference date that was submitted to us. So unfortunately here, there's not a lot of information included in terms of the leases that are there. It's somewhat difficult to read, but there's also no monthly rent except for the last tenant there. And if you look at the next page, on page 13, the mailer here shows a gross income that presumably would take the vacancy into account. See that there's approximately 15% vacancy. And then it's showing us a net operating income of $55,362. Although I can't reconcile the expenses with the net operating income. Something that I do see here, it shows a property management and administration cost of $21,000. So unfortunately, and if you look at prior years too, the information is not easy to understand or in a consistent format that really renders it usable directly for us to make a close comparison with what's there. I don't know what the individual lease rates are at this property. On page 3 we have a series of comparables taken from Sargent. And the last two are second floor rents. And you can see a range there from $905 to $1,465. I think if you turn to our next page, on page 4, some of the upper premises have approximately $9 and some change for their rates, and the main floor premises have $1,556 and $1,434. As you go down through the calculation, we've applied regular table vacancy allowance. We have a net operating income of $61,937. And we saw on the income and expense questionnaire approximately $55,000, though it's unclear if that's the accurate figure and the mistake is made somewhere else on the form, or exactly how that is reconciled. But on principle, the rates that Mr. Smith has in his brief, I don't disagree with them being acceptable rates in the range on Sargent. So the rates themselves, I don't think I have a problem with. Unfortunately, in terms of, as we go down through expenses and things of that nature, we don't have enough information with this property to determine anything beyond that, really. But that's my presentation.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, do you have any questions of the assessor?
I have no questions.
Questions? Brent, questions?
No questions.
Linda?
So just to confirm, this is model driven, then it's completely
Correct.
the model. Okay, thank you, that's all my questions.
And they're using a cap rate of 8.5%.
Correct.
Did you inspect the property?
I have not inspected this property.
Do you have any notes on its average condition? Would you consider it average condition?
The assessor last cycle had inspected it, and there were some notes as to the condition. And there are some photographs that Mr. Smith has provided. I would describe it as average. The location is not the greatest. However, I still think it serves a community. It is built in 1991, so it's not as though it's necessarily a decrepit building or anything like that.
Does it have a basement area? No, it doesn't. It shows 0.
I believe there is a basement area, but it's not, we're not considering it leasable.
And is there vacancy upstairs on the
Correct.
second floor? There's some
Correct.
vacancy?
It's approximately 600 square feet, I believe.
That's all my questions. Mr. Smith, if you would like to take us through your presentation, please.
Certainly, so just, and I recognize the point from the city with regard to the income and expense statement, so just to briefly address that, the ownership group is, well, ownership family rather, it's not a group, is one of the occupants of the building. They're the restaurant on the main floor, Viva, if you've ever been there. If you look at the income and expense, I'll direct you to the city's brief, page number 12. If you look at the city's page number 12, you can see that the owner, president of the company signing for it is Mr. Hoy Tran. And then if you look at the descriptions on page 11 of the tenancies and some of the spellings, you can see that English is not the first language of this particular group. So there's probably some interpretation issues with regard to completing the form in an easy manner for them. Having had discussions with them, I can certainly understand how that would be the case for them. If you look at the I&E again on page 13, you can indicate that they've checked off that it's fully owner occupied. It's not entirely fully owner occupied. They occupy a portion of it, and that the income that they have there is on a gross basis, which it is. So I could not tell you if 77,000+ is 100% projected occupancy. I suspect that it's probably not the case. And we're not relying on their expenses nor their income as provided in the valuation. So that's just a bit of background detail. Looking at the property itself, you can see the elevation of it on the front of my brief there. This is following the snowstorm and the windstorm. You can see the tree down up front. And description of the property is on page number 1. So there are a number of units here. There's 2 on the main floor, one of them being the Viva restaurant that the owner occupies, and then they have a pharmacy on the other side. So you can see the restaurant on page number 2. They put in some new flooring recently into that one. If you look at the pharmacy and the flooring there, you can tell that that's of the vintage when the property was built. So there's a very wide discrepancy there. The second floor is similar in that there's one tenant that they put a new floor in just very recently, and the rest of the second floor looks like page number 4, where it's old and dated, etc. They have had some water issues with the roof. And space-wise, page number 6, this is the interior atrium. As you walk in, there's a significant atrium with stairwell to get to the second floor spaces. So it's very choppy on that second floor. It's not a space that's going to drive a lot of rent. Subsequent to publishing this brief, I got information on another client property at 883 Notre Dame, similar 2-story office building, second floor space, and they were getting net effective rates, because they were on a gross basis too, in the $5, $6, $8 range for that second floor. Now, we don't have that in the brief, but that is something that I would keep in mind in valuing it. So looking at the valuation itself for the property, we discussed obviously the I&E that's been provided. In arriving at fair market value for the property, I believe the city's stated that we're not in significant disagreement with the rents that we have projected for the property. Our rental comparables are shown on page number 11. And looking at the space, we've projected $12 a square foot for the 2 main floor units. And we have utilized a $10 a square foot, I believe, amount for the second floor space. Sorry, just pardon me for just a moment while yes, this is summarized on page number 12. So you can see the 2 main floor units, we've used a rent of $12 and $8 a square foot for the second floor. Again, Class C office space in Winnipeg, as published by Cushman & Wakefield, average is $11.61 a square foot. This would be certainly substandard in terms of build out and location. It would be under that rate. $8 is certainly appropriate. Our difference beyond that in the valuation is with regard to the non-recoverable expense allowance, which we've obviously presented to the city. So using those projected rents, we come to $60,000 in potential rent, deduct 6% vacancy, and the other expense allowances capitalized at 8.5%. We have a final market value of $591,000. And I'm open for questions.
Okay, thank you. Questions, Mr. Assessor?
Are you aware of what the assessed value was last cycle?
I'm not, this is a new client and I did not represent them previously.
Are you familiar with any changes at the property?
Between that time frame and now, I do go to Viva for lunch once in a while, so I think they put a new floor in
Right.
their unit, and they put a new floor, as shown in the photo, in the one unit upstairs, but that would be it to my knowledge.
Right. So if the previous representation agreed to a higher value, you maybe wouldn't necessarily expect that the value would go down this cycle?
Well, I'm not basing my evaluation on any prior work done on it. I'm looking at the property as it is, and I'm unaware of that past detail or what was included in it.
Okay. Do you have, did you gain access to a clearer picture of the financials at the property?
Not at this time, no. So we're basing it on market rents and appropriate market expenses, etc.
Okay.
And again, they do have vacancy on the second floor on a regular basis.
Okay, those are my questions.
Thank you. Mr. McIntyre?
The picture on page 3 in the pharmacy, now this is on the main floor. It looks like it has water damage too. For example, they've elevated the paper towels off the floor,
Yes.
and it looks like the carpet's stained.
It does look that way, yes. The owner did not comment on that, and I have no further detail, but the damage that I saw was on the second floor.
You can see it
Yeah.
clearly from the second floor. I'm just wondering if it's gone all the way down to the main floor.
I couldn't comment, I'm afraid.
Okay, that was my question.
Ms. McFadden?
I have no further questions.
The picture on page 4, the bottom picture, where is that?
That's second floor office space. It would be on the rear of the building, I believe, that particular unit is, or particular section of the unit. There's a tenant that occupies a large L-shaped unit that runs from the front to the back and then along the back.
So you've been inspected the property, you would have. So the picture on the top of page 5, that's second floor as well?
That's correct.
That's kind of, would that be the middle, and then page 5 on the bottom is the right hand side, or?
So the page number 5 at the bottom would be the eastern side of the second floor. And that
Or the
was
western, the eastern or the western?
The east
Side.
side,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. And do you know how long that space has been vacant?
No, again, the I&E didn't have that information, and I didn't get that detail out of the ownership. Again, the language was a bit of a challenge.
Okay. And the assessor had said that you guys were sort of in agreement on the rental rates, but correct me if I'm wrong, but
I had the same follow-up question.
isn't the assessment department
I believe you said you
using?
did not dispute them.
Just to clarify, I think that Mr. Smith's rates are within a reasonable range. We're sticking by ours as well, being supportable, but we don't contest that, those rental rates specifically. I think management and what's happening with the expenses of the property, unfortunately, which we don't have that information, may provide greater information.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. That concludes the hearing this morning.
Thank you for your time, everyone.